This is the Third Christian Crusade by Resterhouse. Time frame of the Crusades. The First Crusade began in 1096, ended in 1099. The Second in 1147 and ended in 1149. The Third, which we will be talking about today, began in 1189 and ended in 1192. The rest don't really matter because we won't be talking about those today. Brief history of the Crusades. The Christian Crusades were a series of conquests between the Christians and the Muslims to control the Holy Land, and especially Jerusalem. There were a total of 8 crusades launched by the Christians, but only the first ever succeeded in reclaiming the holy city of Jerusalem. All others failed. Some key people involved in the Third Crusade was Saladin, the Muslim ruler. He took Jerusalem and started the Third Crusade. The second being Richard I, also known as Richard the Lionheart, who was the King of England at the time, and he got his nickname by being a fierce warrior and winning almost every battle he fought. King Richard was also always on the front lines of battle, unlike other kings who stayed at the back. He did this to show strength and courage to his troops, and it boosted morale a lot. Some people also say that the Third Crusade could boil down to a duel between these two kings, although they never met up in person, nor in battle or in conference. The two other important figures of the Third Crusade are King Frederick Barbarossa and the King of France, Philip II. These two kings offered aid in King Richard's crusade to retake the Holy Land. This gave the Third Crusade the nickname of the King's Crusade. The Crusades took place in the Holy Land, also known as modern-day Israel, and focused on the city of Jerusalem. How did the Third Crusade begin? Well, it began, like I said earlier, the Muslim ruler Saladin overtook Jerusalem from the Christians and effectively removed the Christians from the Holy Land. As you can imagine, this didn't sit well with the Christians, especially the Pope. The Pope at the time was Gregory VIII, and after he heard the news of the attack on Jerusalem, he sent out word to every Christian he could. Pope Gregory said in his call to arms that, quote, God will reward those who liberate Jerusalem, end quote. He also promised those who fought that they will be given the land and riches. Because of what the Pope promised, many lower-class people volunteered to fight to retake Jerusalem. But when this ragtag army of peasants marched into battle, they were slaughtered like animals, and it was clear that a real army was required for this crusade. The second army, raised, consisted of knights and proper soldiers who could hold their own in battle. King Richard's army consisted of about 15,000 men. Combined, the three kings, Richard, Frederick, and Philip, had nearly 45,000 men, and around 20,000 of them were armored knights. These soldiers and knights were looking to increase their land and wealth, as well as to gain honor and to fight for God. The Siege of Acre was the first major battle in the Third Crusade. This attack lasted for 2 years, from around 1189 to 1191. It was led by the knight Guy of Jerusalem, who was the heir to the throne of Jerusalem. The city of Acre was surrounded by large battlements and had a pair of huge towers. Even Saladin doubted that Guy would be successful in conquering the city. However, instead of attacking, Guy's soldiers pitched their camp outside of the city and dug ditches and moats around it. In the meantime, reinforcements from the west began arriving. The ships brought both fresh soldiers and the needed supplies to build siege weapons. The Crusaders built massive siege towers, 4 stories high, just as high as the walls of Acre. When the siege towers were ready, the Crusaders battled from them. Archers shot arrows at the walls as suppressing fire for the ground troops. Muslim archers shot back from the tops of the walls of the city. Meanwhile, foot soldiers piled wood and rocks into Acre's moat. The filled moat would provide a foundation for the siege towers to pull up alongside the walls of Acre. The Muslims retaliated by throwing boulders and pots of Greek fire from inside the city, but the Crusaders had reinforced the walls of their siege towers. The Crusaders also tried unsuccessfully to destroy one of the towers by ramming containers filled with explosives into it, but due to the changing wind, only the ships were damaged. The siege launched a second time when King Richard and Philip II arrived in 1191. The French tunneled under one of the towers and set the supporting timbers on fire, while the rest of the army bombarded the city from the outside with siege weapons such as catapults and siege towers. The French even named one of their catapults God's Own Sling. Saladin was unable to rescue Acre, and the city surrendered in 1191. The Massacre of Ayadi. After the fall of Acre, King Richard attempted to negotiate with Saladin. Richard was willing to release a large number of captive Muslims in return for the true cross, the supposed cross that Jesus himself hung from. Unfortunately, Richard's request was met with hostility, as the Muslims, which are people of the book, would not like to give up such a relic. And in his rage, King Richard took 3,000 men, women, and children to a hilltop and slaughtered all of them. They were killed with swords, axes, or even beaten to death. These men, women, and children were prisoners of Acre. When Richard arrived on the island of Sicily, at the coastal city of Messina, the city was in turmoil. Food and water was scarce, and tensions were high among the locals. They began fighting with Richard's troops and even some of Richard's close companions. King Richard was quickly fed up with this and ended up capturing the city and wintering on the island before he set off for the Holy Land. While sailing to the Holy Land, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick met his demise while taking a shortcut given to him by locals. It was said he was thrown from his horse while crossing the Salaf River, and weighed down by his armor, he drowned before he could be saved. Other accounts describe the event as the king entered the river to bathe and to swim, as he enjoyed swimming, and he drowned in waist-deep water. Which one do you believe? While sailing to the Holy Land after departing Messina, King Richard's fleet was caught in a terrible storm. This storm ended up shipwrecking some of his ships on the island of Cyprus. The ruler of Cyprus, Isaac Comnenus, took all survivors prisoner, including Richard's fiancée. King Richard attempted to negotiate again, but was met with hostility for a second time. King Richard didn't bother with any more negotiations and proceeded to destroy all of the enemy forces with his military superiority, and then hunted down Isaac himself and imprisoned him. Now Isaac had a very terrible fear of being put in iron shackles, and he pleaded with Richard not to place him in them, and King Richard happily obliged by putting him in silver ones instead. King Richard and his army of crusaders finally arrived on the outskirts of Jerusalem, but with only 80 knights and not many soldiers remaining, he feared that they would be susceptible to a counterattack if they managed to take the city. In great disappointment, they ended up retreating back to Acre and forsaking the siege of Jerusalem. While King Richard was in Acre planning on returning home, Saladin attacked the port city of Jaffa. While he captured the city, he failed to take the citadel, and this gave the survivors time to call for aid. Upon hearing of the news of the attack, King Richard immediately began sailing for Jaffa, and proceeded to wade to shore and do battle with the Muslims, claiming victory and driving them out. After the Battle of Jaffa, Richard is sailing home to England when he becomes shipwrecked again for the second time. This time he's not so lucky, as he is captured by the King of Germany, Henry VI. He is brought back to Germany and held for ransom of 150,000 marks, more than triple the yearly income of the English crown. Somehow the money is raised, and Richard is freed and brought back to England. Thus concludes the Third Christian Crusade.